We are Fandom Roulette.
Two nerds with a passion for
History,
video games,
tabletop games,
and, well, really any nerdy stuff that comes into our lives.
While we might not be able to name every ship classification in Star Wars,
Or every Pokemon.
or every spell in the player's handbook,
Well, one of us can.
we're still here to have a good time. Hey everyone, welcome to Fandom Roulette. This is Joe.
Then I'm Cody.
And on Fandom Roulette, this is a podcast where we talk about a myriad of nerdy things, including history, video games, tabletop RPGs, and whatever nerdy stuff we want to talk about. So, Cody, what nerdy stuff have you been up to, my man?
Nerdy stuff? Oh boy.
I know, it's nothing we do in our normal day-to-day lives. This is
Right.
all front
I have
for
to
podcasting.
Yeah, we picked this subject, and we actually mostly just
watch the sports ball and have a beer at the local tavern.
That's ironic, because I did actually watch a baseball game today.
I
didn't.
Redacted.
Redacted. Sports, boo.
But yeah, nerdy stuff. I played in. Well, I ran a game of D&D with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Your group. Fun. That was good fun. I played in a game last night.
Very nice.
And I will talk more about what I did in the video game section.
Color me shocked.
Right. Side note, but still relevant. Have you seen the new trailer for the Joker movie? Or the Joker thing? I think it's a movie. I assume it's a movie.
It's a movie. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, man.
You're not feeling a Joker origin story?
I'm pretty sure it's like one of 3 solo Joker projects that Warner Brothers is working on right now.
They really love the Joker.
They really do.
I mean, to be fair, he's a fun character in his prime, but I feel like, and I'm trying not to be the naysayer of change, because change is good. Mm-hmm. But I thought at least, and who knows, I'm not part of, I would say I'm fairly excluded outside of the realm of DC fandom, but I thought the reason people liked the Joker so much is because he's told his origin story, but you never know which one's the right one, or how kind of fucked up he is. So having that feels like it kind of normalizes him from being this crazy supervillain to just kind of a villain. I don't know.
Sure. I mean, it could very easily be a couple of things, which is at the end of the movie, he's and that's one of the things it could be, or something like that, and then it ends, or who knows, maybe the last scene is you pan away from Joaquin Phoenix, and then you zoom into a chemical plant, and a dude gets knocked off of a bridge by Batman, and it's oh man, which Joker is it?
Now that would be a fun and interesting twist, right? However, I don't think that modern movie media is going to even attempt that concept. I think that's way out of the purview of movie cinema, unless it's a very indie project.
I mean, it is Todd Phillips, who is always kind of been a cool pseudo rogue filmmaker. He did he did the Hangover movies, right? And the first one was a huge comedy hit, and they were oh, Todd Phillips, we fucking love it, give us some more of that, the Hangover. And then the second one, he was all right, I'm gonna make one of the darkest movies ever. And then everyone was but it's just a comedy. He's I actually hate the Hangover franchise. And then the third one is also just very miserable, and it's just a meta commentary about making franchise movies or something. I never actually saw 2 and 3. Wait. I just know that they get really bizarre.
Well, we're gonna spend the first intro part talking about The Hangover 2. The Hangover 2 is basically The Hangover 1, but in Taiwan?
Tibet?
Yeah, somewhere.
One or the other.
And it more or less hits like the same beats, and it does that thing where like you never find out where that person is, because I'm pretty sure it's the same guy who gets like lost, and they find him, and he was like in the hotel or some. Spoilers for The Hangover 2. If you haven't seen it, you didn't really miss much, but he was like in a fridge nearby where they were staying or something, and they just never bothered to look in the fridge or whatever, because it was like
I was wrong on all 3 accounts. It's Thailand. It is the guy from the first Hangover who got lost, but it's his brother-in-law. Is a different character, and they find him in an elevator as he was getting ice. I fucked up. I'm sorry.
It's like a big like ice locker, for lack of a better term.
Isn't it like the first one? He's like on the roof of the hotel, right?
Yeah,
like,
they drag him up to the roof.
It's always like, oh, it's the first place. It's where you started. Like that's always like the twist. It was like you went on this crazy, 48-hour adventure, and you should have just like looked upstairs, dummies.
Yeah, it was more or less the same movie. Like, I feel like even, like, they hit some of those, like, I'm trying to remember. I just remember being like, this was the same joke from The Hangover 1, but you put it in, like, different context, so it's, like, kind of funny. But,
I mean, I guess my big thing about this, like, the Joker movie is, like, a couple of I guess, on one level, not to, like, isolate anyone, or, like, anyone who's listening or anything like that.
Totally isolated.
Well, I mean, and this could be more like myself isolated, which is like, I wonder if this is like the right climate to release like a character who like, is like, oh, like society is the real villain, and like maybe I'm the sane one, and yada yada yada. Where it's like we're living in a world that's like kind of broken right now, and so it's like,
I see what you're saying, and
yeah.
I don't know.
Like,
I mean, I'm desensitized to that.
It's like after The Dark Knight, like people would dress up as the Joker because, it's like, oh, like we like anarchy, yada yada yada. And then like after Deadpool came out, like everyone started dressing up as Deadpool because like he doesn't play by the rules, and it's like, yes, we get it, you're so cool and edgy. Like,
yeah, I mean, I'll give them one thing. I really dig the ensemble, like the whole thing. Like, I like the way he looks, because it looks like it's trying to also be a period piece.
Yeah, it looks cool and weird, but...
And even though I feel like it's kind of a strange timing, I guess, for like our current, like, at least America's social political situation. Yeah. I think I'm going to see it. I'm not that I'm like, I don't know. I don't necessarily have like high hopes for it, but like I am curious to see how they play the Joker. So, I don't know. We'll see.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I'm curious to see how it's going to be. So.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if I'll like see it opening night or anything like that, just because opening night's when I usually edit the audio for the podcast, but I'll find some time for it, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So what nerdy stuff have you been up to?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's a couple of things. One, I'm reading an old book series that had come recommended to me as a friend, which is called The Dresden Files.
I've heard of this.
Yeah. It's like an urban fantasy. I think like the first one came out like, I would say late 90s or early 2000s, and it's about Harry Dresden, who is Chicago's PI wizard.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Modern day
cool.
wizards, count me in.
And like, yeah, there's like some fun stuff about it. Like the second book, the one I'm reading right now, because I read the first one like a really long time ago, so I kind of skipped it.
Sure.
The one I'm reading right now is about like werewolves. And so, like, they establish like there's like 6 or 7, like when you say werewolf, like you could be referring to like 6 or 7 different kinds of things. Like you could be referring to like a hexenwolf, who is like a person who was given like a cursed item and like turns into a wolf like once a month. Or like it could just be a wizard who like knows shapeshift really well. Or like it could be a lycanthrope who is like a human but they have like the soul of a wolf. Or it could be like a loup-garou, which is like what we think of when we actually think of werewolves, things like that. So the world building in it is pretty cool and fun. And one of the main reasons I'm reading it is my friend is trying to get a Dresden Fate RPG off the ground.
Dude,
so,
yes.
I'm not gonna probably be able to play it all the time, but I wanted to have like a better understanding of the world. And then the other big thing I want to talk about. And then I'll keep this brief just because it's only been one episode. But last week was the premiere of the What We Do in the Shadows TV show.
You know, I've been seeing or hearing commercials for it all over the place. How is it?
Yeah. I thought it was great.
Nice.
I was really happy to see that the 2 main people from the original like New Zealand mockumentary were like heavily involved with it. So, for those of you who don't know, What We Do in the Shadows was a great mockumentary from like, I think like 2010, 2011, something like that, which starred Jermaine Clement, who is one half of Fly of the Conchords. And then, it was written and directed by Taika Waititi, who, then went on to do a little film that you might have heard of called Thor Ragnarok.
I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah, it's funny because you watch it and it's like, this like rather low budget like comedy mockumentary from New Zealand, and someone watched it, they're like, we should probably give that guy like $50 million to make a Marvel movie, right? And someone was like, yeah, cool.
That sounds dope.
So like mainly like the reason I'm excited is like it seems like just to have the original creative team back like means that like the humor is going to be similar. It's not someone trying to like ape the style of this popular thing. It's like the original guys getting to tell more stories. And so once again, rather similarly to the Dresden Files, weirdly enough, which is never a sentence I thought I'd say. And then similarly to like things like Vampire the Masquerade, like the different vampires were turned in different eras. And so, like, they kind of represent the different, like, kinds of mythologies that we think of when we think of vampires. So, like, you know, the one guy is, like, a Russian, you know, like, prince who, like, has a torture chamber. And then the other one's, like a British dandy who, like, wears lots of frilly collars and things like that. And so, you know, once again, we're borrowing from lots of... And then the one guy looks straight up like Nosferatu. So it's, like... We're borrowing lots of different like genres and forms to kind of combine into this one thing. But I'd recommend it because it's been the first episode. If you have Hulu, you can watch last week's, and then there's a new episode out tonight. So I'm excited for it.
Nice. I want to watch it now that I know it's on Hulu.
Yeah. And I think once again, it's one of those deals where it's going to be like the last 5 episodes to air, something like that. So right now we're on week 2, so you have time to catch up. But shall we dive into the history?
Let's dive.
So this week we're talking about famous last stands in history.
Yeah.
And I chose one this time that has the people doing the last stand actually like succeeding.
What? No, they're all supposed to get overwhelmed and bombarded and defeated. It's what you told me.
So this one is the Battle of Agincourt.
Bless you.
Which was, thank you. It was one of the greatest English victories in the 100-Year War.
All right, I'm familiar with those 100 years.
Yeah. It was a big old war, right?
Yeah.
And it took place on October 25th, 1415, which is Saint Crispin's Day, which is in northern France. So,
I just keep thinking about that saint being the saint of Krispy Kreme donuts, and so I've got this whole fandom now of like Saint Crispin of the Krispy Kreme, and it's just a holiday filled with donuts. Donuts fall from the sky. This is the world that I live in. Anyways, continue on with your not donut filled. Damn it!
Uh, but so yeah, they were twin saints who got martyred in 286. So
Rough.
But so people might have a passing familiarity with this battle because of the internet.
What's the internet?
Yep. Did you ever see that video? It was like from way back when. It was like 25 inspirational speeches in like 5 minutes or whatever.
I'm familiar with it. I don't know if I've seen it in its entirety.
So it starts off with a monologue from the play Henry V by William Shakespeare, which is actually the monologue that precedes this battle, which happens off stage because Shakespeare did things on the cheap. But anyway,
was that like a 20th century jab at Shakespeare?
No, he was actually really smart about how he did. So it's like if you ever read like a Shakespeare play, like
right,
almost all of like a lot of them will sometimes feature like big battle sequences. And what happens is like hills will come out and there'll be like two characters who will be like watching over the hill and they'll be like, look, there goeth like the commander bravely riding his valiant steed into the battle. And like off stage, there would be like 4 or 5 guys who would just be like clanging metal pieces together to make it sound like a big battle was happening because like it was expensive to stage like big fight sequences and things like that. So it was oftentimes, 2 or 3 characters narrating the events of the battle with like sound effects off stage, which I think is a classy way of handling battles.
That is fairly clever considering I imagine it would be very expensive to do. But anyways, yeah, I am the worst. I have thrown everything off the tracks.
No, I'm excited. This is great. So after a couple of decades of peace, basically in 1415, the English are like, oh man, we're going to start back up this 100 Years' War. Because the 100 Years' War didn't actually last 100 years. It was just a lot of wars in rapid succession.
Gasp! What the fuck? History?
Yeah, well, it took place over like a period of 100 years. It was
Sure.
Sometimes, a couple decades here or there where they weren't fighting each other.
Well, that doesn't sound very much like a war. I'm calling bullshit on history. I'm coming for you.
Are you going to come for history?
Yeah, I'm coming for history. I'm going to tell them to get their shit together.
All right, well, I'm sorry that we lied to you so egregiously, Cody. But anyway, so here's the thing. There was a little section of England that was called Calais, which actually exists in the north of France. Because everyone wanted to be French during like this time period. Like French was like the #1 language spoken. The English court was actually held in Calais. It was not actually on the Isle of England as we know it. And basically, in 1415, after a failure negotiation with the French, Henry V of England was like, screw this. We're going to start attacking. And so basically a lot of soldiers died because of diseases and their numbers dwindled. And then when they tried to withdraw to English-held Calais, they found their path blocked by a considerably larger French army. So Henry V, like I said, was the king. This war was fought against Charles VI of France. But he did not command the army himself because he suffered from a severe psychotic illness with moderate mental incapacitation. So the French were commanded by Constable Charles d'Albert, who was a prominent French nobleman of the Armagnac party. But anyways, this aside. So yeah, basically Henry V invaded France because he claimed that he could also call himself the King of France because his great-great-grandfather was Edward III. Now, here's the thing. English kings were generally prepared to renounce this claim if the French would acknowledge the English claim on Aquitaine and other French lands. And the French were like, no, we want all those lands back. And he was like, screw you guys, we're going to attack you. This is accurate history speak. But he said it in French. And so basically, during these negotiations, Henry would marry Catherine, who was the young daughter of Charles VI, and receive a dowry of 2 million crowns. The French responded that they considered this generous term of marriage, and they changed it to 600,000 crowns and an enlarged Aquitaine. And by 1415, negotiations ground to a halt, and so Henry was like, "Let's go, boys! It's time to go to war." And so, like I said, basically, this invasion of England of France doesn't go very well. So they decided they're going to start going back to Calais. And he had about 9,000 troops. And then, depending on the estimates, Henry and his men were outnumbered at least 4-1. Many think that he might have been outnumbered as many as 6-1. But there was one big thing that gave them the advantage.
Ooh, wait. Laser beams. They had laser beams. They had lasers, like Star Wars.
So, ironically enough, not quite, but it was something that it was ranged weapons.
Oh, holy shit, they had guns?
They had the English longbow.
The English fantasy gun.
Yes, the English fantasy gun. No, so they had the longbow, which is literally like if you've ever tried your hand at archery, like if you've never used like one of those fancy composite bows, it was literally just like a recurve with a sturdy string and then an arrows. This is considered to be like a pretty significant shift in the history of like warfare.
Oh shit.
Mainly because the English longbow was a weapon that most anyone could use. It did not involve a lot of training. It did not involve a lot of technique. And sometimes it was referred to as a peasant weapon, which, versus like the sword, right? So the sword is something that you had to train with, and you had to fight. You had to train with it. You had to learn the intricacies of it. The longbow was was relatively easy for you to learn how to do. You had to have a supply of arrows. You didn't require a whole lot of training. And the other thing was that the French army's armor just did not do well against arrows. And these archers made up about 80% of Henry's army.
Biggest oof.
Right?
We came to the longbow battle wearing paper plates and our fucking sticks that we have to like run up to them to get them. Ouch.
Honestly, that's why plate starts becoming more prominent in warfare, is because plate was better at deflecting arrows, whereas like when you had like big clunky, broadswords, people could get away with wearing chainmail because the swords weren't super great at like piercing through the chainmail, right?
Right, because weren't they mostly slashing weapons?
They were, yeah. They were broadswords. They tended to be sharp on the sides, and yeah, they were designed for slashing versus arrows, which were piercing. And so after this, you start seeing people wearing heavier plate armor and things like that. And so basically, the French found the fact that the English army were just archers pretty insignificant, because like I said, like this was a brand new style of warfare. They did not apparently too, like the French had plenty of archers and crossbowmen, but no one wanted to let them fire because the site was so narrow that they thought there was only enough room to send in like, basically soldiers. Like these French noblemen basically just wanted to go in and like wreck some English armies with their swords, and they just kept getting shot and shot and shot and shot and shot. And so basically this, like I said, there are some who argue that this like changes warfare as we know it, because of the fact that basically, let's just put it this way. There were estimated anywhere from 4,000 to 10,000 French who died during this battle. England lost about 1,600.
Damn, that is quite a drastic number. And I mean, maybe it's not just this event and it's a series of things, but like it makes sense that the longbow is easier to train, because with like conventional weaponry, you can only train as good as like you can predict your opponent.
Mm-hmm.
And so like there's always going to be that unknown variable of, holy shit, this guy might know something that I'm not familiar with, or is able to like counter these things that I've learned. But like with a longbow or any kind of ranged weapon, that's kind of a point and shoot, my dude. That is looking down the barrel of a longbow and just going whap, and that's it.
They were also much easier to make.
That too, you know, being, I assume, wood and string.
String, yeah. The thing
you
that would
didn't
be
need like a million blacksmiths.
Exactly. And so once again, like swords were expensive, they were cumbersome. There was a reason why only nobles tended to have swords, outside of the fact that they feared peasant uprisings. But yeah, like just the fact that there was this, like, it changed the game. Now armies started putting more focus and attention on archers and archery, and it kind of changed the way that warfare was fought. And this was in 1415. So one last little thing. Basically, the French suffered heavily, so they lost 3 dukes, at least 8 counts, a viscount, and an archbishop, along with numerous other nobles. The France also lost the constable, admiral, master of the crossbowmen, and provost of the marshals. And the crazy thing about this, is that Henry doesn't use this to his advantage. He just continues to get back to England. And he was received in triumph in London on the 23rd. So he returned a conquering hero, that was blessed by God. And very quickly after the battle, the fragile truce between the Armagnac and Burgundian factions broke down, which kind of it kind of threw France into a little bit of chaos, because once again, even though France had like kind of a unification, how do I explain this really quick? The modern day notion of like a unified nation state is a relatively new concept that really didn't start until Napoleon. Mainly to say that like wars were reliant on a lot of weird, often fragile alliances, and so like if you had 2 dukes kind of fall out of favor with one another, it could really screw things up for the long term. And so this lack of unity in France allowed Henry about 18 months to prepare militarily and politically for a new campaign. And basically this campaign was now a lot easier because of the damage done to the political and military structures of Normandy by this particular battle. And so, like I said, in popular culture, the most famous one is William Shakespeare's Henry V, which was written in 1599, which talks about how great Henry was, and it presents the most ideal of kings. He was chivalrous and honest and just, while not being afraid to sometimes be a little bit ruthless. And there are, of course, like songs and ballads, but the most famous presentation of this is, of course, Henry V. So yeah, any questions?
No, I brought it up before. The thing that I was thinking about is like how this fucking changed the game, like it. I mean, think about the evolution of just military, like fighting, like, big groups of forces attacking each other, and like, the idea of having a sword, like a big cumbersome sword, to like get into close proximity with someone to like, attack them. It seems wild in 2019.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, it's pretty fucked up because it's like, a bunch of people died, but like at the same time, like, holy shit, did he was onto something then.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say this too, to make a more to make another comparison in history. The longbow was also pretty dang accurate. Now it was similar to like when people started using rifled weapons in more contemporary day warfare. Because before that, people relied on something called bayonet charges, which was basically your average style musket could fire, I think, like 1 to 300 meters, but it wasn't accurate. So oftentimes you would put these bayonets on the end of your guns, which were like little swords to charge, because, hey, it wasn't super difficult to like miss an entire charging battalion of soldiers. But by the time you get to like the Civil War and we had more rifled guns, once again, like the idea of charging at your enemy was over. It was just, stay in your lines and shoot bullets a lot. So, but yeah, so that's the Battle of Agincourt, a last stand where not only did the smaller number win, but they won and kind of changed how warfare was fought forever. So,
damn.
And with that, you know what I think it's time for?
Middle section.
All right. Hey guys, welcome to the middle section. Hey, do you want to join in on this conversation that we're having here
right now?
Right now, as you're listening to this.
Yeah. Well, here's Joe's phone number.
This is pre-recorded. What? But if you're like, yeah, I know, right? But if you're like, hey, Henry V was a dick and I hate him. Well,
yeah, you know what? That's a fair point.
Why don't you tweet at us at our Twitter handle, which is, of course,
FandomR_podcast.
But if you want to write us like a goddamn dissertation about why you hate Henry V, because...
And I would love to see this.
Well, because, of course, reliance on an archaic form of government such as monarchy is inherently intrinsic to a world that we've created. Anyway, you can send us an email though. Yeah, I know. I was trying to say. Let's just put it this way: like, in order to like justify the things I was saying, I had to get deeper, like into like more jargony terms, and I hated myself for it. But anyway, send us an email at
fanroulettepodcast@gmail.com.
Whoa, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Now, Cody, what if I don't want us to have our email?
Well, if you don't want your email to be probed by aliens from Jupiter, you can go to our website at www.fandomroulette.com. And at the very bottom, past our information about ourselves, past all the podcast episodes, and right before the social media links, there's a little area where you can give us your internet handle, maybe a subject, if you will, about what you want to tell us about, and then a whole little area for you to type out how much you want us to go back to the old format right there. Email free.
All right. Now, what else can you find on our website, Cody? Can you find our RSS feed?
You can find our RSS feed right there. I mean, all the episodes are posted there, and then you can get the RSS feed there, because we're on SoundCloud.
Yeah.
But guess
Cody,
what?
I don't want to go to your stupid website.
You don't want to go to my SoundCloud?
Where else can I get... Who do you think we are? Some kind of SoundCloud rappers?
I mean, I like to think we spit hot rhymes from time to time.
I don't know if I've ever rhymed once on this show.
I don't think we have either. But anyways, you can also find us on iTunes. Think about it,
that kind of blows.
We're also on iTunes and Google Play and Spotify, so you don't have to find us in a sea of hot fire rappers on the SoundCloud.
Yes.
We're also on Instagram and Tumblr and Facebook with Fandom Roulette as our name. And my lovely wife posts stuff every week about silly, out-of-context things or just generally funny things. I really enjoyed the Thanos one that she did a couple weeks ago. That one made me giggle.
That was pretty golden.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I'll save this for later.
Okay.
Not in the middle. It's like, my friend heard a theory for Endgame that he thought was kind of cool.
Nice. So now that we've said all the things that we can say about our podcast, let's get out of here. Yes.
What are you talking about this week, my friend?
This week, I'm talking about a game that kind of sits on the weird edge case of indie games, because by definition, the indie games are, developers who probably didn't take any publishing money.
Okay.
However, this game, and I'll explain why it's I feel like it fits. I played a game called My Time at Portia.
Ooh. Which
came out into early access January 23rd of 2018. Okay. It's developed by a group called Pathea. And you might be familiar with them because they worked on Planet Explorers if you're into other indie games. Okay. And they are published by a group called Team 17, which, if you're familiar, they were the ones who originally made the Worms franchise and Full Contact.
Oh. Okay.
But in 2010, they had like a buyout situation, and a lot of the old owners left, and they decided to refocus the company to be a quote-unquote publishing company for indie gamers, or for indie games. Okay. And they've worked with the people who did Overcooked 2, and a couple other, lots of indie games that I hadn't even heard of until I had to look them up because I wanted to know what else they had funded. So while they're technically published, it's still very much like an early access indie game. So that's why it's on my list. But for those of you who are enough about fucking semantics, what's this game about? Well, it's an RPG simulator game, kind of akin to Stardew Valley, Harvest Moon, and those kinds of games, with a sort of post-apocalypse twist to it.
Interesting.
Yeah, you play the role as a quote-unquote builder in a post-apocalyptic town called Portia. And basically your main quest is fairly simple, is to become the best builder, like your predecessor before you. And while it is because I know post-apocalypse usually brings about kind of a dour setting, this game does a really interesting job of reminding you that you are basically a town built out of the ruins of another town, but at the same time being very kind of happy-go-lucky, bright, beautiful colors. Nothing is too intense or violent looking or anything like that. It's not Mad Max. It is very much like a Harvest Moon game. If you've played any of the 3D Harvest Moons and N64 and up, you're getting that kind of vibe. Very very happy, bright colors, things like that. But if you're I don't know what any of that means, basically the way this game plays is you're a builder and you're tasked with building things for the town, and basically the way this works is you'll get a contract and someone's I need you to build this thing, and then you get materials, which if you're familiar with Minecraft, basically you get materials from breaking rocks and cutting trees and attacking the local wildlife. The game does a really good job at basically teaching you those various activities, and eventually you'll get to the point where you can't do it all in one day. You kind of have to pick all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go into the mines this day, and then the next day I'm going to fight monsters, and there's all sorts of social mechanics in it. There are festivals where you can go in and go to a horse race and race against the other townsfolk. One of the first festivals is a karate competition. So this game's also a light RPG. So you can fight the other townsfolk in this kind of test for like who's the strongest, and
Yeah.
it's super fun. You kind of have like a relationship meter, if you will, with every one of the townsfolk, and you can learn more information about them and, you know, get access to different activities as you talk to them, give them gifts, play the various mini games. Like there's a rock paper scissors mini game that you can play. There's like you can actually spar with the other people in town, which is kind of a wild thing. It's got RPG mechanics, so like you level up, and the RPG mechanics are fairly light, so it's not like super daunting on top of like this, oh, I have millions of resources because I'm like a builder and I build things.
Yeah.
Basically with the social system, you do all these things and you can pursue those relationships, and some of the people you can get married to and like go further down that relationship tree, if you will.
Very Stardew Valley.
Very Stardew Valley, very Harvest Moon. And granted, so when you ask me what I've been up to, I've put roughly 20 hours into this game.
Oh, wow.
I love this game. If you're not familiar with me or like my video game preference, it's very much simulation games. Like I put so much time into Stardew Valley. I made like 2 20-hour plus files, one on the computer, one on my Switch. I really like this one. A couple of the the things that I don't like about the game is that it is still early access, so there are some like glitchy issues. Like I still like the game's never crashed on me yet, fingers crossed, but it'll chug in certain areas and like stutter. So like visually that can be kind of jarring. And the only other thing that I don't like is that occasionally there will be stretches of the game where like they don't tell you what to do, and you have to like find stuff to do in the game until like the next thing happens. Like there are some weird like pacing issues, but it's a super relaxing game. If you are familiar with the Stardew Valley franchise and farming's not really your bag, I think this one is at least worth a look-see. But yeah, I do not regret spending the money that I did on this game. I love it.
Yeah, where can you find it?
You can find it on the Steam and the GOG and basically PC, and I believe it is coming out for the Switch here in a hot minute.
Awesome.
I know it's getting a console release, but I'm not sure exactly when.
April 16th.
But yeah, that's my time at Portia.
That sounds crazy.
Yeah. Do you have any
I
questions?
Try it.
It's really fun.
Yeah, so I mean, like, I guess so as a person who's only kind of like seen Stardew Valley from like the side, I know there are like various win conditions. Like, is that true for this game as well, or?
From what I understand, so every month you're like fighting with other builders in town to be the best, and the way you become the best is by taking contracts, and each contract gives you like basically fake reputation points. And just over the course of the game, like at the end of the month, like if you are first place, the town will reward you with gifts and stuff like that. I know there's kind of like a win condition, which is to get to like to open up all the different areas of this area, because like there's a couple places that are locked behind certain conditions. But in terms of most of these games have like a fake one. I don't know this one's because I don't think I've gotten to that point yet.
Okay.
But it's usually kind of like by the time you get there and you're invested in these games, you already won. It's just how much better than the win condition you won at.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, that's all I have. And you know what? Ooh.
What is that?
It smells bad.
How bad would you say?
Oh, I could get descriptive, but I don't want to. It smells like chicken that has sat out for too long.
I feel like you've used that every
Have
week.
Do I? It smells
I
like
don't know.
seafood that sat out for too long.
Man, what it smells like mildew in a haunted house.
It smells, look, it's a garbage kid. Or, as Cody once called them, a trash cherub.
I love trash cherubs.
Or, what was another one? You had another good one. Okay, so this is the one where this is the section of the show where we roll up a completely random character for you in a little book called Xanathar's Guide to Everything.
Wow, does it really have everything?
It has a lot of stuff in it.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty extensive. They were like 2 more books after that. I'm just kidding. But anyway, so yeah, in about halfway through the Xanathar's Guide to Everything, if you ever want to roll up a completely random player character or NPC, they have tables that can allow you to basically create completely random NPCs, which sometimes they're hilarious because they become contradictory to one another. We roll them up and we tell you guys a little bit about them. So this week we're talking about a person named Chaos Nightmist.
Yes! Love it.
Chaos Nightmist is a half-orc bard who was a noble.
Huh.
Now, of course, Chaos is neutral good, like all orcs are. And they know who their parents were or are. Now, one of their parents was an orc, and the other was a half-orc. And I have a typo in here that one parent was an or, but that is not correct. Now, they were born in the home... Yeah, I am sure. So, if you think about it, they're technically 3/4 orc. But that just doesn't roll off the tongue quite as nicely.
Yeah, I
you ever thought about that?
Saying. I mean, yes, of course, because I'm sure I've had conversations with people about, the race combinations and stuff like that. Like, why aren't there half-halflings or whatever?
Half-halflings, like a dwarf halfling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fun fact, by the way. So, this will be quick. So, in Lord of the Rings, you know how his name is Elrond Half-Elf?
Sure.
So his parents, one was an elf and one was a human, and then the gods were basically like, hey, we've never had this happen before, so you guys get to choose what you are. And so Elrond chose to be an elf, and his brother chose to be a human. So anyways.
Interesting. That's pretty neat.
Race in Tolkien gets weird.
That's also probably true.
So anyway, so he was born in the home of a family, or they were born in the home of a family friend, and they did not have any siblings. They were raised by a single mother or stepmother because their father abandoned them. And they lived a modest lifestyle in an encampment or village in the wilderness.
Wow.
Now, they did have a few close friends, and they lived an ordinary childhood.
Okay.
They became a noble because they come from an old and storied family, and it fell to them to preserve the family name. And they became a bard because they were gifted. They were a gifted performer, which attracted the attention of a master bard who schooled them in the old techniques.
Ooh, the old techniques.
Yeah, that magic shit. Now, their defining work was A Fool in the Abyss, a comedic poem about a jester's travel amongst demons.
Ooh.
Their instrument was an orcish drum.
Nice.
And their embarrassment was the time when their comedic song Big Tom's Hijinks, which, by the way, they thought was brilliant, did not go over well with Big Tom. Yeah, that was hilarious. Now they're 21 to 30 years old, and they had 2 life events. They made an enemy of an adventurer, and they committed a crime or were wrongfully accused of doing so. That crime was counterfeiting, and the result was that they did actually commit the crime, but nonetheless the authorities found them not guilty.
Wow. Probably because of their silver tongue.
Yeah. I saw a fun post once where it was like, how come our bards play music? Like, why can't we have, drawing bards? And I was like, that's an interesting question. I mean, obviously you need semantic components to your spells, but whatever. But anyway, so now that you know about our good friend, Chaos Nightmist, we have to put them through the vigorous ringer, which is, would they go into a hot topic, and would they buy an item from it? Cody,
I feel like they would.
Your thoughts, please.
Yeah. I feel like they would ironically go into Hot Topic, but not buy anything.
Whoa. like, ironically, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Like, ironically going into Hot Topic, which people already go into ironically?
No, there are some people that do go into Hot Topic unironically. I know. I'm opening up a whole new world.
I'm not gonna dare close my eyes. I was trying to make that line work. It was sweaty, but I got there.
Oh, so sweaty, but I loved it. Yeah, I ironically, maybe as like a gag gift, bought something from it for a friend with the counterfeit money, but yeah, I'm not convinced. Yeah. I'm not convinced that they went into it to pick up their favorite My Chem Row wristband.
Yeah. You always go to My Chem Row, so
it's a guilty pleasure.
Yeah. By the way, I finished Umbrella Academy. It was really good.
Nice.
But anyways, I think I would agree with you. Maybe they won't even go in, or like they go in to just like laugh at it. They're like, man, look at that corner of like Tim Burton, Alice in Wonderland stuff that's still sitting there from like 2010 or whatever that movie came out.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's my call on this is I don't think Chaos would buy anything, and if they ever go in, it's there's no intention to buy it. They just want to make fun of some goth nerds. So
the worst.
So anyways, Cody, what's up next, my friend?
Oh, somebody just came into the room. Hold on 1 second.
Oh shit. Oh God. My dude?
Blair!
Oh, hi.
It is I, Count Coldula.
Count Coldula?
Yes, I couldn't come up with good name on spot.
Yeah. I mean, no, it's good. I like it.
So today we're talking about vampires. Oh,
snap. Really?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah. Are you a vampire?
Yeah, but I usually go out in a persona so people don't know who I actually am.
Shit.
Yeah.
Cody.
What?
You've been a vampire this whole time?
Well, yeah, everyone's a vampire nowadays.
Or did Count Codula just put on a voice to make it sound like you because you're dead now? Or what's up with that? Or was that just part of the act? Like, where you pretended to die to make it...
Well, no, now he's changing into Cody. He has now become one.
Oh, shit. That's
yeah.
Oh, my God.
So, this week, this season, we're talking about monsters, and...
I'm scared.
Don't worry.
Oh, God.
I won't come and feed from you tonight.
I think I made this joke last week, too.
You might have.
Oh, I'm so scared. I'm so spooked.
But anyways, so last week we talked about playing one of these characters, or one of these creatures of the night. But we didn't get really specific. We were doing broad strokes on purpose so that when we talked about these characters, you kind of already have a backstory of like how you would play one of these characters.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be fun if we talked about D&D vampires versus your kind of standard folklore vampires.
Well, let's do it, Cody.
Yeah. So, for those of you who don't know,
fun, like Sting music right there, like.
All right, I'll look for that online for free.
You don't actually have to do that.
That's too late. It's too late.
No, you don't have to do that.
So, for those of you not familiar, I guess I'll describe a D&D vampire for starters.
Do it.
So they are a fairly difficult encounter. There's a whole campaign book called Curse of Strahd, which basically runs a low-level party through the this vampire's like demi-plane of existence from like 1 to 10.
Okay.
Where you can fight, said vampire. And what's great about D&D vampires is they got some of that like fun, like old folklore lore attached to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, like the Flaw of Forbiddance. The vampire can't enter a residence without an invitation from one of the occupants.
That's always a classic one. They can't go over water, right? Or like
water. They are harmed by running water.
Yeah.
Vampires take 20 acid damage if it ends its turn in running water. Fucking rough.
So druids, that's where you can come into shine.
Yes, love it. They also, if you stake a vampire in the heart with basically a wooden stake, they are incapacitated. I'm sorry. I read that wrong. These are things that happens when you try to read in the dark. If you stake a vampire in its resting place via a coffin or whatever, it is incapacitated until somebody removes the stake.
Oh, yeah.
So that's actually that's a pretty big weakness. So I imagine most of you budding DMs out there, that is something you want to consider when running a vampire, is making sure that place is hidden AF.
Yeah.
Because, that's a pretty big, like, loophole to be like, well, don't have to worry about that vampire. Bop, bop, bop. Hammer that stake in his heart.
Or conversely, that could be a fun beginning of a campaign.
Oh, yeah, you, like...
Your
group has to, like, recover a body, and then it turns out that you let a vampire go. Oof.
Yeah. Like, some weird little guy is like, please go to this place, and, like, they thought my relative was, like, a demon and all this stuff. You're like, whoa, we'll protect them, and then you pull out the heart, then a vampire comes out, then you go back, and, like, they've left.
Yep, it's pretty fucked up. Yeah. But on top of their like fun weaknesses, they can spider climb, which means they basically walk on walls and shit. They have a bite that basically drains your hit points. Lovely. To the point where, like, if you're drained from this, like, you can, like, die permanently. They have the typical vampire charming that is familiar with, like, lots of different vampire lore, where they can, like, charm people into, like, letting them into their homes and things like that. Mm-hmm. And then one of the cool ones is Children of the Night, and basically the vampire can, like, call upon reinforcements. Like, if they're outside, they can call upon wolves. And if they're inside, they can call upon rats and bats and things like that.
Yeah, that was actually one of my favorite things. If you look in the player's handbook, not to jump too far ahead, but they talk about vampire layers, and one of the regional effects is that there's a noticeable increase in the population of bats, rats, and wolves in the region.
Right, because they can just call upon them.
Yep.
And that's another thing about vampires too, is like you can do a lot of like neat things with like their layers and like how their layers affect the area around them. Like, for instance, in Curse of Strahd, the demiplane that the party winds up going to, it's a vampire's lair, and it's always like there's no sunlight ever. Like, whoa. It'll still be day, but it's like overcast, so like Strahd can just like stroll wherever he wants at any point because it don't matter none.
Yep.
And then the only real, like, I don't know if it's like D&D vampires come from folklore vampires.
Sure.
But the one thing I do like is that they have a vampire spawn, which is basically like kind of like your vampire underling, who, like, someone who got turned but isn't quite as strong as like the master vampire and things like that, which is a great I imagine if I were to create a vampire themed campaign, I would use the spawns as like the immediate villain, only to find out that creature was actually just the spawn of another one, and now that creature's pissed off as you get to that point.
Yeah.
It's a perfect 1 to 10 campaign, because vampires basically have so many, like, fuck you cards to the players. Like, even if you were to reduce its hit points to 0, unless it's, like, in sunlight, it doesn't die immediately. It, like, turns into mist and goes back to its grave.
Mm-hmm.
Which is fucking wild to me.
Yeah, think about that for a second. Like as a player, where it's like you defeated the boss and he pops up 3 days later.
Exactly, like that's fucked up. Also,
yeah,
it has the regenerate property. Mm-hmm. So every time you hit it, unless it's like fire or radiant damage, like it gains health back. So like this is a fairly like tough opponent. I don't know if most vampires have that kind of regenerative property. I don't know. Is that something that comes up in folklore vampire? I know they're like pretty tough.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just kind of comes from the fact that like vampires tend to be pretty indestructible in media.
Right, right.
And they had to figure out a mechanic-y way to say it without saying like Dracula can't die technically.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, vampires are... I wanted to do vampires because, one, if you're ever sitting there going, man, I really want to do a vampire campaign, I'm always going to recommend any version of Curse of Strahd from the D&D supplements. It's basically is very much the Dungeons and Dragons, what can I do to make a vampire that's the focal point of an entire campaign. It's in the gloomy Barovia. You basically go around. Basically, it's like this gothic horror setting where you're constantly like wondering what Strahd is going to do because he doesn't want to like kill you. You haven't quite pissed him off yet. But he's intrigued by you, so he wants to like put you through the ringer.
Yeah. Another thing I think is kind of cool too is if you look in your basic player's handbook, they also give you recommendations on how to make vampires even scarier. If you're a jerk, you can make spellcasting vampires.
Yeah. There's a whole section on like warrior ones too, where they like they're in fucking full plate, like rough.
So that's like your I'm trying to think of an example if I can in media. Like I know there's at least one Dracula where at least for a bit of the movie he is in like plate mail. So yeah. So like, you know, if this isn't enough, like now you give him a fucking great sword that has a +9 to hit. Like, come on, guys. Like, right. have fun throwing that at your party, right?
Well, not only that, but with the spellcaster option, one of the spells that it gets is Dominate Person. Mm-hmm. Just be like, nah. You just sit there and let me feed on you. Like, rough.
Also, too, you can cast Greater Invisibility. So, like,
yes, which is a amazing spell.
Just fucking, you know, your party's like creeping through a mansion and then out of nowhere, you're fucking bit, dog. Like,
yeah, you're just like, all of a sudden there's just fangs in your mouth or in your neck.
Fangs in your mouth?
Yeah, I mean...
That AO3 account was set to private.
Oh, shit.
I got it on the podcast.
Yes, you finally got that joke to work. But yeah, I think not modern day vampires, like, you know, insert Twilight joke here. That kind of, but like like you could do an entire like masquerade themed like D&D campaign where like you get caught up in this fucking, you know, basically court of vampires. There's also ways, and I know we were going to bring this up, but like player characters as vampires.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And the idea that, you know, if you are just like the master vampire, the top tier, if you bite somebody and kill them with it and then bury them underground, they are a vampire the next day. So like that's for DMs, that's like a pretty big like, oh shit, like you can turn some of the party into vampires, provided you can get the circumstances to work that way.
And in some cases too, the handbook even says that like if that happens, the DM can like take control of that character sheet.
Yeah.
So now this once ally can become, someone you have to fight, which could, really screw around with the party, especially if it's like a beloved character.
Right. Which begs the question, if you were to run a vampire campaign,
yeah,
like the main focal point is vampirism and all of its glorious forms.
Yes.
If a player were to turn, what would you do? Would you take the character away, or would you let them play it?
Ooh, that's a great question. So, I think what I would do is I would take the oh gosh, I would take the player to another room.
Okay.
And then I think the first thing I would do is I would make them make I talked to them a little bit about it, and I would make them make a wisdom save, and depending on how they did on the wisdom save, I would give them either, so they can be a vampire, but they are still fighting against the master vampire. I don't know if that means they like die in the long run or whatever. But if they fail, then I give them a secret motivation.
Okay.
And kind of make them like a betrayer amongst the party.
Okay.
Or if they decide that, I talk to them, I'm like, hey, do you want to play it like this, or you would like to do something different? If they wouldn't want to play it like that, then I would just take the character sheet, make them roll up a new character, and then use that character eventually as like a mini boss later on in the campaign. So
cool.
I would let the player have a little bit of a choice in the matter. How about you? How would you handle it?
It kind of depends on the game that I'm running. I would. It truly depends on the group and the players.
Sure.
If I had it my way, and we were doing a vampire campaign with the whole nine, I think I would just ask them your turned. Here are the kind of negative effects of what a vampire is. Like, if memory serves, you are, by all intents and purposes, lawful evil.
Okay.
Your stats change. You get a bunch of cool abilities, but basically, unless you somehow can reverse the vampirism, you are a creature of the night who feeds on people. That's what, you don't eat food anymore. You don't go to your favorite restaurant and get chicken parm. You go to a restaurant that sells bodies and you feast on them.
Especially because of the garlic.
Well, yeah, that too. Gotta watch out for the garlic. But, that being said, I'd probably give them a choice. It's how attached are you to this character? Yeah. And if they are super attached and they want to keep playing it, I'm like, all right, well then let's do... I would probably incorporate some kind of feeding thing, they can resist the urge to feed.
Mm-hmm.
But if they fail that, then they either I control the character or they go and feed on somebody, and then depending on how vampires work in my setting, because of course, because role playing games and all that stuff, your vampires can be very different from normal vampires. There might not be a tethered connection to the master, or maybe there is. There are variances of vampire lore and mythos and stories where you get turned, you get turned. You're a vampire now, and that's it. But some people you might be connected at some spiritual or mental level with the vampire, which could be an interesting thing on its own, being hey, I'm letting you do this because I know one day you're going to turn on your party and eat them and stuff like that. And that can be a very cool thing to play out if everyone's
for sure
invested. Basically, and this is my number one rule for doing anything that's kind of anti-party or doing things that aren't your typical standard, talk with your player and be how do you want to roll this out? Because technically your character's mine.
Yeah.
It's under the effects of vampirism, and then go from there. And usually you can do some really cool stuff. I've had one person get turned into a vampire in my Rowdy Rough Boy campaign, and he has become an NPC that the players will occasionally meet because now he's a servant of the vampire that consumed his life.
That's pretty solid.
Yeah.
Shall we wrap her up?
Sounds good.
Well, we want to thank you guys so much for listening to yet another episode of Phantom Roulette.
Yeah.
This was a fun one to record, I think. Yeah, please feel free to go back to the middle section to listen to how you can get in touch with us. If you want to get in touch with us, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Pass it along to a friend. Let someone else know about it. All of that wonderful stuff. We love recording this, and we like to see you guys engaging with it. So
yeah, for sure.
So once again, thanks for listening and signing off for Fam Roulette. This is Joe.
And I'm Cody.
And as always, stay nerdy.
Stay super nerdy.